My name is Akinyele Umoja. I was born in 1954. I'm currently a professor of African American Studies at Georgia State University. But more importantly, I'm a activist. I've been a lifelong activist since I was 18 years old. And I'm 65 now. I'm currently a member of the Malcolm X grassroots movement, and I participate in MXGM and support the efforts of Malcolm X grassroots movement. I'm an author. The first thing I can remember, I don't know if we can consider it a global crisis, but when I was 11 years old, I lived in Los Angeles, California. I really lived in Compton, California. And during that time, the Watts rebellion, the Watts uprising, that people call the Watts riot, occurred. And, I just remember seeing, even though my family lived in Compton, and Compton wasn't the epicenter of the rebellion, it was in Watts, which was probably about 5 miles from where I lived. And during that particular time, my father, who was a minister, his church was to have a barbecue to raise money. And he wanted me to roll with him, even though I was 11 years old. My mother didn't want me to go, but my father's thing was I knew how to get in and out of the hood, because during that time they said the path to get through the hood was to put 3 fingers up in the air representing White. And so I rolled my father, and I saw like the fires, and I could see the people taking merchandise, things of that nature. But then the thing that hits my memory the hardest is us rolling, me going to the deliberate barbecue with my dad, and I'm being a naive little kid. I used to look up to police and the military, for what things I saw on TV. The TV kind of orients you. I could say more on that, but orients you to be a loyal American. And I saw the National Guardman, and I spoke to him just like, "Hi, Mr. National Guard." Cat pulled a gun on me, on an 11-year-old kid, and thankfully didn't pull the trigger. And there was another moment. My uncle was speaking at a revival at our church, and we were there late one Sunday night, and we heard fire engines going down Avalon in South Central LA, and really it was really part of Compton, where the church was. And so we, the kids automatically, like a lot of little kids do, we ran out of the church to go hear the sirens. And then there was a truck full of National Guards, and when they passed by the church, they pulled their weapons on us. So, those type of things and then with the political education I was getting from my family members, from people in the community, I began to see, okay, we were really considered by the people I thought who were heroes, were considered enemies. And then I began to see the need to have our own capacity to protect and defend ourselves and things of that nature. As I began to mature, get older, and I became more familiar with groups like the Malcolm X Foundation, the Black Panther Party, the US organization, other organizations in the community. And then after the rebellion too, there was more political and cultural influence that grew in the community that I became a part of. But that's the first crisis. Of course, since that time, I've seen other rebellions. Of course, the 1992 rebellion here in LA, but also here in Atlanta, after the cops were let go off the Rodney King. Of course, the Katrina Hurricane Katrina and its aftermath and devastation it had on our communities in New Orleans and the Gulf Coast. So those type of crises I have, seen. I didn't live in New Orleans, of course. I was to go down there with others after the devastation. We were able, and your sister Rukia Lumumba and what's the brother's name? Kevin Powell. They organized a campaign along with People's Hurricane Relief Fund and others, Katrina on the ground after the devastation of Katrina. And we were able to go down there and help folks rebuild their homes and provide other support. I'm also proud that after Katrina and as people began to rebuild, the National Council of Black Studies decided to give this conference in New Orleans. And we went there, and I led a team of people who helped one of the elders in the community rebuild her home. So one of the things I learned from some of these efforts is that during these crises, it's time for us to pull together. It's really time for us to pull together prior to the crisis, because the crisis is going to come. Crisis is part of the human experience. Santua, are you familiar with the 8 Bowl ceremony we've been doing in our movement? And there are different elements in the 8 Bowls for your listeners. Is that we use these substances we taste for part of our rites of passage: honey for the sweet times, lime for bitter times, salt for consistency, and to spice the life. We have cayenne pepper though for the hot and critical times, and that's for these crises. They happen. They're part of life. Whether people experience floods or they experience hurricanes or earthquakes, and I've lived through earthquakes in California, major earthquakes. In hot and critical times, the next element is water, because we have to maintain a cool head in hot and critical times, and we have, but it's best to be prepared to navigate it, and you navigate it through number one, and another element. The next element after the water is African palm oil, which was used during the time of that Africa traded it, and it was used to represent the institutions we need in our community. And through our institutions, our families, our community organizations, schools, our community businesses, Seeds of Revolution, one of the things it does is to project and put out a message that comes from us and not other people, right? But we need information and interpretation that we can rely on, because even during this pandemic, I've had people shoot me misinformation. For instance, someone told me that if you had melanin, you're affected by
you
the
protected.
Yeah, and then I'm looking at African people in the cities, not only in the city but across the U.S. empire. And so we need our own vehicles to get the proper information and know who we can rely on, because there's so much information, particularly with social media, that we can get right, that we're being bombarded with now. So who can we rely on? Who's reliable? And who's been consistently giving us proper information and an interpretation of what's going on? So if we're better organized before it goes down, and I'm not just saying in terms of community, even in our families. That's one of the things I love about your family, Asantewaa. You all have always been organized. I remember you all having family meetings and things of that. And that's something. So our families, which is the first unit of struggle that we all engaged in, we have to have a network there with our lineage, and then with other communities, other people in the community, to be able to have a base of support when this goes down. And you know, the family might look different. Mine might look different from Asante. Whoever the listener is, your family might be different from ours. But you got a network of people that you're connected to. If it ain't by blood, it's fictive kin. If you don't have that, you need to have it. Because during these hot and critical times, you need to have someone to rely on. And we need to be able to work cooperatively and know how to work cooperatively. So in the midst of the crisis and even after the crisis, as we rebuild, then we can pool our resources and we can pool information to be able to move forward, because we can see through this particular crisis and others we've been involved in, whether it was Katrina or other ones, we cannot rely on the state. I mean, some of us remember Katrina and how the cavalry never came, and how people, you know, had to save themselves, and then they had to help save their neighbors. In fact, when the government and white corporate forces came, oftentimes they saw us as the enemy. And we know cases in Katrina where people were just killed by police, you know, just sniped on the street, things of that nature. So it's important that we get organized even before, and we seek positive information and know reliable information so we can know how we can move forward. I want to share one thing, too. I think I shared this with you, too, Asante. And I almost feel like Spirit was speaking to me. But if you might remember that I said about 2 months ago, I had a dream.
Yes.
And your mother appeared in the dream, right?
Yeah.
It was like your mother appeared to me in a dream, and we were at a community event, and she had contingents of brothers who she was giving commands to, and they were drilling, and they were showing what they had learned. And I think your brother, your oldest brother, Shaka, asked me, well, what do you think that means? And I had to marinate on it for a minute. And I think she was really telling us we need to get prepared. And, you know, I know your mother was very much in tune with public health. You know, that was probably not a term she used. I know she was concerned with the health of the people, and she was always concerned with us being organized. I remember after Katrina, your mother and your father went and did some training with people in civil defense in case we have a crisis in that community. And I remember her doing a report at a meeting I was at with some other elders that Baba Shokwe Lumumba called. I think we were it was either in Jackson, Mississippi or New Orleans. And it was like a preparedness, or they were putting forth, I'm talking about your mother and father, that we needed to take advantage of these resources in order to be prepared when a crisis takes place. So who knows, I believe, you know, her spirit was trying to speak to us to know that we need to be prepared in crisis. And I don't think we should take what's going on here lightly. And I don't tell you the truth, and I don't want to spread rumors, but in my heart, I don't even know what started it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And we definitely know, even if it wasn't intentionally started, that we have to rely upon our own resources, that we have to get organized, and that self-determination is the key, that if we know that we have to depend upon our own resources and we have to plan, we have to come together and communicate with each other when we can, then we need to get prepared for things that might be outside for issues like a pandemic that we don't start, which is overwhelming. The best preparation we have to prepare in peacetime for what occurs during wartime. One of the things I was thinking about is getting prepared for this call was our brother Baba Kwame Ture, our ancestor, and he always talked about getting organized and being a member of some organization. But I don't think of organization in the traditional sense like, a card-carrying member, we need to make sure our families we're networking with our families. We need to make sure if we're part of a spiritual community, like a church or a mosque or a Ile, that we are connecting with people and we're communicating with people. Within that, I think it's necessary for us to get reliable information and have means within our groups to disseminate that information. And so that means in your family. So one of the things that's been happening, particularly since this crisis, we were doing it anyway, but we're doing it more now, is when somebody in my family lineage gets some information about this disease or whatever, we share it in a group chat and we be in conversation with each other about what's going on. But we got to get organized. And then as more of us get organized, the organizations can link up. I think it's important. For instance, in Jackson, they've organized the People's Assembly. And the People's Assembly is a way for all of those community organizations, families can network and then come up with a common agenda, because I think we need to have people who advocate for us on the policy level too. So, for instance, we mentioned that and you mentioned also that there's so many of our people who are dying. It's important that we have people who also are advocating for us in terms of the public resources, because we pay taxes and things of that nature. So we need to have resources that are allocated to our community, one. But number two, we need to be connected to community resources that we control within our churches, within our families, within our community organizations. And so I would suggest that we have to think on that level. But the first thing is to do, as Baba Kwame Ture, preached to us, is we got to get organized. If we're not organized, you're just out here by yourself trying to bend against this system. You don't know what information to rely on. You don't know where to, family members might know where to get resources from, things of that nature. Some people have more resources than others, They can't be able to share them. And so we just need to rely on each other and cooperate with each other throughout this crisis and look out for one another, watch each other's backs. This is something we need to do anyway, but in times of a crisis, it's even more essential that we do that. And again, that's why it's important that you're doing this work too, because through this we can disseminate more information. And of course, everybody's not going to get it, but as some of us get more organized and move forward, we'll be able to, be examples for other folk and help to move this thing forward for us. As I've mentioned before, one of the things, and I've been doing this as an educator too, is I've tried to create circles where I can have a conversation with my students and colleagues about it. And I learned things, and I think also we can challenge misconceptions. So I've been emphasizing that with my students. Okay, let's talk about what's going on. Even before the school was was shut down, and I had conversations with students in my class, because I see that as an opportunity to create a circle of information dissemination and gathering. Because sometimes I think students who have relatives in healthcare who've been able to share information with us about what's going on. In other words, they might say, well, look, they tell us it's not at this level, but no, it's beyond what they're telling us on the media. So as an educator, I've just attempted to do that, but also encourage the concept of critical thinking. When I think of critical thinking, I think of Malcolm X, be able to think for yourself and not rely on the media, because the media, and I'm talking about the corporate media, can, make your friends look like your enemies and your enemies like your friends, right? So we formed a circle. I know in some of the work that you do on our youth, one of the rituals we use is the Umoja circle, right? Where we circle up and we put what's valuable in the center, but it's also the time to share information. So I've just tried to take that concept with my students to that we began to share information with each other, and we create an informal Umoja circle, if you will, to share, gather, to critique, so we can continue to learn together. And myself, I know when this started, people were, began to ask me, well, what's your opinion? And I don't profess to have all answers. I want to hear from other people before I even make an assessment, because in our community we have, even though there's some ignorance and even though there's some misinformation, we have a lot of informed people and a lot of people with resources. When I say resources, I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about people who have knowledge and have gone through experiences that could teach others. And so that's been the thing I've been trying to do, to create these informal circles amongst my students, to use the classroom to be that informal circle where we can share with each other, we can learn. I've even posed a question students have to come back with next week. I'm teaching a course on black activism, so I asked them, as a black activist, what should be our response to these high numbers of our people that are being killed, right? And so, or who are dying, from this disease. What should our response be? How should we respond? There are other questions that come about too. We know that in Cuba, they've been able to send people to a variety of countries to help them with this crisis, and also that they have medicines that aren't available in the United States, and they're helping people. So how does the international situation impact and the policies of the United States toward other countries that they deem as their enemies, but they might be real friends to us? Cuba's really proven historically it was a friend of African people. So how can we be aware of that, and how can that information be used to inform how we should look at other people in the world outside of who the United States tells is our friend? So that type of information and conversation, I think, can arm, our people and to make more wise decisions and to decide how we need to move forward. I'm not saying don't get information, but share it and critically evaluate it as we move forward. And definitely we have to get organized, even more organized than we are today. And we have to take some of the organizations that we belong to and make them relevant for a situation like this. So if you're in a fraternity or sorority, if you're a member of a church, a mosque, or ELA, you got to be able to make sure that those are places just not for entertainment or just to gather to and socializing, but how can we utilize those as vehicles, as fighting vehicles to support our people's self-determination? And I think, we just have to do that. We have to also think about how are the institutions we're a part of, how can they contribute toward building cooperative economics? How can they be utilized to develop sustainability? Is there anything people are producing that can allow them in a time of crisis to be able to feed each other and feed our community? We're running to the stores, but can we feed ourselves if it came down to that? And so these are the type of questions I think we're going to have to think as we move forward.
Ashe. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for doing this work, and thank you for being so committed to carrying the struggle